Everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. I'm Caitlin Buckley, and I am the Capacity Building and Strategic Partnerships Officer at the Cape Cod Foundation. And I'm excited to welcome you, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. In my role as Capacity Building and Strategic Partnerships Officer, I manage our capacity building grants, steward special projects like the Strategic Emergency Response Fund and state and federal funding. And I facilitate our civic leadership initiatives like the Cape and Islands Partnership for Nonprofit Advancement. A few housekeeping notes. We will be using a slideshow, so we recommend choosing the speaker mode in the upper right-hand corner so that you can more easily see who is talking during the presentation. Our program will be about 40 minutes, and we have left time at the end for questions. And as you might have heard, this is being recorded, so if you need to hop off the call or you missed something or want to share something with a colleague, this will be sent out afterwards, and all the information is going to be posted on our website. And it'd be great if you haven't done so already, if everyone can update their name in your screen name for Zoom and write in your name and the organization you're representing, and also if you'd like your preferred pronouns, and also feel welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to have more of a dialogue. Since there are so many people on the call, though, we ask that you keep yourself on mute and type any questions that you have in the chat. And we won't be able to access the chat while presenting. However, at the end, we're going to close out and look at the chat and engage in Q&A. And don't feel like you need to wait to enter your questions in the chat until the end. Feel free to just write them in as they come to mind, and we'll scroll all the way up once we reach the Q&A session point. And we are any links or things that we're referring to, we're going to send in a follow-up email, and you'll be able to get that the same way that you learned about this information session from our newsletter. So if you're not already signed up for our newsletter, be good to sign up for that on our website. And anything that we're not able to answer in the session, we will send out in the follow-up email. And we're going to stop the recording before the Q&A session begins, so that everyone feels comfortable to ask whatever comes to mind without it being, on the recording. And lastly, we really value your feedback. So we'll be sending a survey in our follow-up email too. And we appreciate you taking the time to fill that out to let us know what was helpful to hear and ways we can improve our webinars like this. And lastly, actually, we are using closed captioning here. And so if you'd like to enable closed captioning, on the bottom of your screen, there's a CC button, and you would just click that to enable closed captioning on your screen. And so with that, I'd like to pass things off to my colleague, Helene.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Helene Goodrow. I'm currently the Foundation's Program Officer. I'm actually transitioning away from the Foundation in just about a week. So Caitlin is going to be the best grant-making contact at the Foundation until a new program officer is hired. In the meantime, I'm really happy to be helping with today's presentation and look forward to answering questions that you might have. So here's what we'll be up to today. First, we're going to provide a brief overview and update from the Foundation as a whole. Then our focus for today's session is on our targeted capacity building grants. We hope that you ask as many questions that come to mind, because if you're wondering something, I'm sure someone else in the call is as well. And although we're not in person, we hope that the session provides space for networking and sharing via the chat. Most of all, we want this to be as informative and useful for you as possible. So this is a beautiful picture of our wonderful team. Caitlin and I work collaboratively with our Director of Programs and Donor Services, Dara Gannon, and the rest of the Foundation's incredible staff of 10. We also have 12 members of our board of directors and over 100 volunteers who work on our grant and scholarship committees. So what is the Cape Cod Foundation? Well, the Cape Cod Foundation is one of about 1,700 community foundations across the world whose mission is to match community resources with community needs. And this model was started over 100 years ago. And the idea for each community foundation is that they serve a particular geography. So ours here at the Cape Cod Foundation is Barnstable County, although we do have a few funds that support the islands in southeastern Massachusetts. That's the exception rather than the rule. We work closely with the community foundations on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, as well as about 11 other community foundations across the state of Massachusetts. So we're often asked how we accomplish our mission as a community foundation. And there are many ways that a community foundation achieves its mission. Most primarily, we work with individuals, families, businesses, community groups, and other nonprofits to establish their own charitable fund with the foundation. Right now, we have more than 330 individual funds. The majority of these are endowed, which means that they're pooled and invested. So they're designed to last in perpetuity. In turn, these funds distribute funding back into the community every year through grants and scholarships with approval from the foundation's board. I just want to put in a quick plug about our scholarships before we dive into grant making. Our scholarship application portal is currently open and the deadline to apply is April 1st. So if you have any colleagues or clients who are in school or considering further education, or if you just know someone generally who might be interested, please have them reach out and apply. They can reach Mary Beth Burwood. She's our scholarship officer if they have any questions about the application. This is all available on our website. We offer a breadth of scholarships, so it's not just about graduating high school seniors. We have opportunities for adults returning to school, certificate programs, graduate programs, and so on. Our goal is really to make sure that every prospective student on Cape Cod is aware of these opportunities. So we appreciate your help in spreading the word. And we'll send in the follow-up email some contact information about our scholarships. So now back on to our grant making. While the foundation offers discretionary grants, which is the purpose for today's meeting, it's worth noting that a major facet of our giving actually comes from our donor advised funds. And donor advised funds are funds in which a donor, their family, a business, etc., makes a grant recommendation to our board of directors, and they really drive their own giving. That being said, our staff act as philanthropic advisors to donor advised funds, and we share community needs and grant ideas with them, helping to foster connections and really make some great funding matches. It's worth mentioning this because it is one avenue for partnership with the Cape Cod Foundation, and it's always available. So we encourage you to keep us informed of your funding gaps throughout the year on an ongoing basis in case there's a match with a donor advised fund. Most who are familiar with the Cape Cod Foundation are probably most familiar with this sort of transactional work like grant making or scholarship making. But we also spend a lot of time serving as a connector, convener, and a participant in regional efforts regarding broad community issues. Want to share a few examples of that. One example is our coordination of the Cape and Islands Funders Network, which is a convening of many of the region's key funders. Another example is our facilitation of the Partnership for Nonprofit Advancement, which is a convening for entities that provide support and help strengthen our region's nonprofit community. There's a monthly newsletter that we send out on behalf of that particular collaborative, and it's a great resource for you all to learn more about local nonprofit training and professional development opportunities. And just want to note again that we'll send a link to that resource in our follow-up email. Additionally, the foundation funds nonprofit training programs such as the Institute for Nonprofit Practice and the Mass Community Foundations Partnership. We encourage nonprofits and their leadership to consider these opportunities, and again, we'll send that information in the follow-up. In terms of civic leadership, the foundation sits on a variety of task forces and cohorts to learn, support, and identify opportunities where we can actually leverage our grant funding to address unmet needs. For example, we sit on the Cape and Islands Regional Network on Homelessness, and we've made a number of grants as a result of that participation. Finally, we serve as a fiscal sponsor on a very limited basis due to our own staff capacity, but we're happy to make connections between organizations for any initiative that's looking for a fiscal sponsorship in case we can make a match with another organization for mission alignment. And I'd also like to touch briefly on our partnership with the Kelly Foundation. We're asked about this a lot. The Kelly Foundation is a private foundation, and they're a separate organization to the Cape Cod Foundation. They have their own board, application process, and so on. However, since 2020, our staff team have provided the Kelly Foundation with grant administration expertise, which includes a shared grant management system. We'll go into that a little bit later. This collaboration between the foundation and the Kelly Foundation is efficient for both parties because we're leveraging economies of scale, grant making knowledge, and we share funding ideas with one another. Hopefully that also makes it easier for you as applicants because you can have one conversation and be connected to multiple funding sources. And you can find all the relevant information about the Kelly Foundation on their website, which is simply kellyfoundation.org. All right, so discretionary grant making, probably why we're all here. The foundation offers a few competitive discretionary grant programs. We use the word discretionary because committees of the foundation, with approval and guidance from our board of directors, actually have discretion over how this funding is used. Many of our discretionary funds are earmarked for certain purposes or fields, and a small amount are totally unrestricted. Our core discretionary grant-making programs include our targeted nonprofit capacity building grants, which are the focus of today's session, our program grants, our town fund grants, and our Women and Girls Fund. I'd like to share a brief word on each of these programs for you all. So program grants are grants that support and strengthen programs, projects, and one-time community events that make a lasting impact. Program grants can be used to fund operational expenses that are essential to implementing a project or program, and that could include equipment or staff time. We encourage you to look out for more information about our program grants, which will be coming out later this spring. On to the town funds. Our current town funds are the Falmouth Fund, the Chatham Fund, the Fund for Sandwich, and the Harwich Fund. Each of these funds make grants to support efforts in their respective towns. And I encourage you again to keep an eye out for information about the town fund opportunities because those applications will be available probably over the summer, following in line with a similar timeline to years past. Capacity building grants support initiatives that help nonprofits reach the next level of their operational, programmatic, financial, or organizational maturity. This includes a cohort-based peer learning component, which increases relationships, collaboration, and knowledge sharing between organizations. That grant program is obviously the focus for today's session. And last but definitely not least is the Women and Girls Fund, which is dedicated to strengthening the lives of women and girls in our region through grant making and providing resources that redress systemic inequities that oppress women and girls and limit their opportunities. The grantees for that program are being announced around now, and we expect to share more information about further grant making opportunities later in the year. With all of that being said, I'm going to pass it back over to Caitlin.
Thanks, Blaine. So as a 501c3 nonprofit ourselves, we also write grants to larger foundations and government agencies to address specific needs and initiatives on Cape Cod. At the onset of the pandemic in March 2020, we allocated $100,000 in discretionary money to seed the Cape Cod Foundation Strategic Emergency Response Fund. And fundraising continued in order to have resources for immediate and ongoing pandemic relief and recovery efforts in the years to come. As of December 31st, 2022, we raised about 5.6 million and allocated about 4.2 million to more than 70 nonprofit organizations. And this success is not ours alone. We applied for and received funding from state and federal entities that utilize community foundations throughout the Commonwealth to identify community needs and deploy resources quickly and strategically. And we also received generous support from private foundations, corporate partners, and individual donors. Our grant making has been strategic and proactive, and most funding has supported nonprofit organizations assisting residents with food, rental and mortgage payments, utility bills, transportation costs, medicine, childcare, and other critical needs. And we also supported organizations helping our most vulnerable populations. like the elderly, people with disabilities or mental and behavioral health issues, victims of domestic violence, immigrants, and those who were homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. And the balance of grants supported nonprofit capacity building initiatives across Cape Cod. In order to help reimagine and rebuild our community, we continue to provide funding to strengthen the nonprofits providing critical programs and services. Now let's talk about eligibility for our grants. We predominantly fund 501c3 charities with some exceptions. And so those exceptions can include municipalities, civic organizations, schools, and faith-based organizations. So if your organization is not a 501c3, we encourage you to read through the grant guidelines on our website and see if you qualify, and also feel welcome to contact us if you're unsure. So for our grant making, we invest in impactful initiatives across the region, and our goal is to move the needle and drive systemic change. We invest in under-supported areas of the community where we know that needs are great, but current resources are not strong. When I started 2.5 years ago with the foundation, it was clear that this particularly included funding for organizations who support the Cape's underserved and increasingly diverse communities. We've done a lot of work at the foundation to strengthen our grant making in this area. We believe deeply in the nonprofits we support and their leadership, and they are our trusted partners in leveraging our funding to impact the community and scale for success. They know when to adapt, pivot, or stay the course with any funded initiative, and our job at the foundation is to support them, be flexible and responsive. As I mentioned, our grant making is broad and supports all aspects of the community, such as arts, health, housing, environment, and youth. You can see here a breakdown of our distributions from the past 5 years, and then from last year. And important to note that the education piece of the pie includes scholarships, and you'll see that Health and Human Services comprises a significant portion of our annual giving. And we are particularly interested in nonprofit initiatives that respond to our programmatic priorities. And so these programmatic priorities feed into the organizational strategies outlined in our recently published report, Connecting Cape Cod. This report focuses on emerging trends, promising practices, and hard and anecdotal community data. It details the foundation's strategies, our initiatives to build flexible resources, our partnerships and leadership role in the community, and our efforts to strengthen the nonprofit sector through grants and other valuable resources. We encourage you to read through these materials to learn if your initiative is a fit for our funding. So we just shared a lot of complex information, and our recommendation is to read through the information on our website to determine eligibility, and then tell us what you need. Sometimes your effort is a fit for a competitive grant program. Sometimes it's a good fit for a donor-advised fund, a town fund, or a special grant initiative. Based on that, we'll work to steer you in the right direction.
All right, so now I'm going to start talking about our grant management system. At this point, many of you are probably familiar with our online grant management system. It's a system that we use for the majority of our competitive grant opportunities. The system is used for applications, award letters, decision-making, and follow-up, such as grant acceptance forms and reports. Once you sign up for the grant management system, you'll periodically receive electronic communications from us through the system, and your organization will have all of its history with our discretionary grant making in one place. There's a really great video on our website that provides an introduction to using the system, and we'll be sending that video as a link in our follow-up email after the session. I just wanted to touch on a few important notes about using the system today. Really key important things for you to keep in mind. So the first is that your organization can only have one organizational profile. If you create a duplicate profile in the system, it could pose problems. And if you're unsure whether your organization has a profile or not, we would encourage you to contact the Cape Cod Foundation just to see before you create a new one. You can have multiple contacts associated with your one organizational profile. Many organizations have contacts for their lead grant writer or development person, and then one for their executive director or president. It's most important that you have a contact for whoever will be managing your grant writing and foundation relationships on a daily basis. Another important note is to please save your password. If you do happen to forget your password for logging into the system, you can very easily reset it yourself on the login page. When you're preparing an application in the system, we encourage you to save your work frequently because the system will time out after a certain period of inactivity. The system does autosave occasionally, but it's really best to save as you go. And we also recommend that you press submit when you are finished. A helpful tip that we've heard from a lot of our grantees is that you can use a Microsoft Word document to draft your application initially so that you can use its spell check and character count feature before then transferring that over into the online system by just cutting and pasting the text. All right, on to everyone's favorite piece, the budget. We are still using the Philanthropy Mass Common Proposal budget template for the full application stage of our capacity building grant and many of our competitive grant making opportunities actually, because we're aware that other funders across the state use this form. We also use the same budget template for some of our town funds. We used it for the Women and Girls Fund for our program grants. So it's good to pay attention to this because it will apply to multiple opportunities throughout the year. I recommend, if it's possible, to use that link that's on the slide right now to follow along with me when we're talking about the budget template, and that will probably help you conceptualize what I'm about to say. Overall, your budget should reflect the story that you tell in your application narrative. So budgets can be a real stumbling block for many applicants, but they are typically a great area of importance for our review committees. A few notes on the budget. If you do have the template open or once you're able to look at it, you'll see that there are 3 columns. And the first 2 columns entitled This Request and Project Budget are the ones that you need to fill out for your application. You might also decide to complete the 3rd column, which is the organizational budget column, but you can upload your unique organizational budget separately if that's easier. We want to make it as easy for you as possible. So you can use that 3rd column, or you could just ignore it and send in your own operating budget that you already have prepared. We ask that you include both income and expenses in those first 2 columns so that the committee can see the entire picture of your proposal and they understand how foundation support fits in. This will also help us to potentially address other funding gaps that you might have for any particular project. So when you're looking at the income on the This Request column, that should only include the amount that you are requesting from the foundation. So if your grant is for $15,000, you put $15,000 at foundation income. Income on the project budget column, however, should include all funding sources that are necessary to operate that project. So that would include your ask to the foundation and then other funding sources beyond that ask if there are any. The expenses on the This Request column should include expenses that you would like the foundation to cover. So how is that $15,000 ask going to be used? Expenses on the project budget column should reflect all of the expenses that are necessary to operating your project. I hope that's helpful. We do have a limit. We do not have a limit around overhead and administrative costs, no limit there. So we encourage you to include those sort of operational type costs that are essential to you accomplishing your mission. And we encourage you to include those throughout your budgets. And that applies to the capacity building program as well. Feel free to itemize your budget as much as you would like, but you should know that we trust organizations to use funding as appropriate to implement a project. So you can leave some line items more general like staffing and equipment rather than breaking down specific staff salaries or equipment costs. We are making every effort to be less prescriptive about what funding can be used for across your overall budget. We will provide a video in our follow-up, and it's also available on our website for how to really dive into this budget more deeply. I strongly recommend, if you haven't prepared a budget with us before, to view this video before you start to submit and prepare your budget. And that will be in the follow-up email, as I just said. All right, Caitlin.
All right, so let's dive into talking more about the star of the show today, targeted nonprofit capacity building grant programs, which is a bit of a mouthful. So for the sake of brevity, I'm going to refer to that as our capacity building grant program moving forward. We recognize that organizations need financial support to improve their systems and operations, and that in turn strengthens their ability to serve their community and clients. And we know that capacity building funding is particularly important now since the demands for services has grown and service delivery models may have changed due to the pandemic. The foundation defines capacity building as intentional efforts to increase organizational ability to effectively fulfill their mission and build long-term sustainability. This is accompanied through strengthening an organization's core systems, skills, knowledge, operation, and management practices. Our capacity building grant program is intended for strong Cape Cod nonprofits that are at a point of critical change or growth, have already assessed and identified an organizational capacity building need, and simply need the resources to implement a project to address that. Capacity building grants will generally be between $15,000 and $25,000. If you have an application for a request that's below that threshold, please let us know, because there might be other fits instead of the capacity building grant program that might be able to support you instead. And a letter of inquiry, or LOI for short, will be due on April 13th. Really, really important to note, this LOI isn't actually a letter. It's not a letter, it's a brief application in our online grant management system. On May 11th, we'll let applicants know if they are invited to apply for the full request for proposal, which we abbreviate as RFP, and the RFP will be due on June 1st. And we'll then make grant announcements on June 20th. So capacity building will support equipment, staff, consultant fees, or other expenses essential to implementing a project. It will also have a peer education, peer learning cohort component for executive directors to participate in peer learning networks with other grantees. And this includes an initial kickoff meeting, then bi-monthly 2-hour meetings, tours of grantee sites when possible, and a mixer with targeted capacity building alumni. Grantees can also, it doesn't have to be the executive director. A grantee can choose to designate a different staff member to participate in these meetings instead if it's more appropriate. And also organizations are welcome to have multiple staff members attend. It doesn't need to just be one if they feel like that would be useful. And overall, I'd say that these are like the shining star of the grant program that we get feedback on that really helps organizations to move that needle. We use these meetings to foster relationships, collaboration, knowledge sharing among grantees. And we really strive to make sure that these are as useful and responsive towards the grantees' needs as possible. So the initial kickoff meeting will be used to gather the grantees' feedback on how to best structure the peer education network meetings throughout the grant year. So I mentioned that the capacity building grant program requires a brief application that we're calling an LOI, and then a full application for those who are invited to continue on in the process. We're hopeful that having an LOI will save applicants time and provide the opportunity for us to work more closely with them throughout the process. By doing so, we also hope to ultimately support projects that are most aligned with the overall capacity building grant guidelines. Basically, we don't want organizations to go through a lot of work if it's not the right fit. So the LOI is a simple application and essentially asks about 7 questions, and then you'll be asked to share more information regarding the project budget and population served. And the full philanthropy mass budget template will not be part of the LOI stage. So if you're invited to submit a full request for proposal, then you'll be asked to fill out a full budget template. In our online grant management system, there's a link to preview the full RFP questions, and our questions along with the financials should really paint a full picture for the committee on why this effort is essential and how our funding can contribute to this work and how it will make a lasting impact on the community. So that means that your narrative and budget should complement one another. And for those applying for funds for a consultant, you are welcome to use any consultant of your choosing. You're not required to identify who your consultant would be or their exact hourly rate in the LOI stage. However, we do encourage you to conduct some research and to get quotes so that you have a rough estimate of what your total project budget will be. Now I'd like to share more information about examples of projects that capacity building grants will support. And please note that this is not intended to be an exhaustive list. These are just examples that are meant to, and they're not, sorry, and they're just examples. They're not meant to be prescriptive in any way. And we recognize that some of these examples might not be relevant for your organization's work. We welcome you to apply for projects based on your organizational and capacity and community need. I also want to highlight that applicants can pursue multiple projects for their proposal as long as the projects can be completed within one grant year. So examples of projects are listed on this slide, and they're also listed in our guidelines. And you can also read a description of our 2021 and 2022 grantees on our website. That's a really great source of information. And I think that many of our grantees might also be open to reaching out if you have questions or just kind of getting a better sense of what types of projects have been eligible in the past. And for strategic collaboration, that's what I wanted to zone in on. So one example of what strategic collaboration might look like for a project would be working together with other organizations towards strong, visible, and vocal advocacy efforts for public policy decisions. So that could be related to a community issue that affects each organization's populations and ability to fulfill their mission. It could also involve efforts to challenge a range of systemic and cultural norms, such as substance use disorder or mental health destigmatization. Another example is partnering with another organization to create a shared services model in which two organizations come together to staff one staff member and hire one staff member. The key is to demonstrate overall potential for tangible impact and how this impact would benefit the grantee organization's ability to carry out the mission. So what is considered when reviewing a proposal? From a process perspective, our staff initially screen applications for eligibility and completeness, and grant committees evaluate applications and forward the recommendations to the foundation's board of directors for approval. Applications are evaluated based on community need and opportunity, clear objectives that relate to the applicant's work, evidence of the organization's ability or experience to implement the work, and a practical plan to achieve objectives and make a sustainable impact. Applicants are also evaluated based on the organization's health and capacity. We recognize that some grant proposals involve work that has never been done before. And if that's the case, we take that into account, whether your organization has the foundation or partnerships necessary to implement the project. Other considerations include the organization's financial health and budget, like diverse funding strategies and ability to leverage resources. Lastly, applications will be evaluated based on having a clear and well-scaled plan to measure impact of the proposed work. Overall, it's a good idea to clearly address these areas in your application. And we also have some general grant writing tips on our website that might be helpful to review. And we'll send that in our follow-up email as well. So while proposals may include a planning component, they should be primarily action-oriented. Let's talk about the strategic plan as an example. Going through a strategic planning process or board retreat would be considered planning, and it would not be a good fit for a capacity building grant. However, implementing components that came out of an already developed strategic plan or already, having taken place retreat to take your organization to the next level would be a good fit. For instance, an organization might use their strategic plan to inform their process to streamline operations or expand. For long-term impact and sustainability and outcomes, proposals should clearly demonstrate how the project will result in long-term impacts. Examples of this include increased organizational efficiency or reach, and how the impacts can be sustained. They should also have clearly identified expected outcomes and evaluation processes to measure the impact. And priority will be given to proposals that demonstrate strong collaboration and cross-sector partnerships, although it's not a requirement. Our team is taking on more of the background research about your organization in advance of committee review. You'll notice that our applications no longer ask for organizational information like your mission statement, board list, 501c3 letter, and so on. And we're doing that to hopefully save you some time. And we gather the relevant organizational information based on conversations with you from your website, GuideStar, and so on. And this is the case with many funders. So it is the best practice to have your information available on your website if possible. We've provided, this is another really, I think, important mention. We've provided a general character count. However, a generous character count. However, this does not mean that you should feel any burden to use all of that available space. Use the space to share only what you feel is necessary to say. Please also note that the character count does include spaces. Another note on collaboration, going back to that, is that you may be contacted to share a letter of support from another agency if this collaboration is essential to the successful delivery of your project. A central goal of ours overall is to learn about organizations who are effectively incorporating values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in their mission, operations, and throughout their programming. In particular, we're interested to learn how your program incorporates diverse perspectives, how accessible your services are for communities across the region, and how your staff teams are equipped to work with diverse populations. A stumbling block for many organizations can be about impact and how to evaluate success for your work. I recommend that you consider your response both qualitatively and quantitatively. For example, what milestones do you hope to reach throughout the year for your organization and for the community you serve as a whole? How will our community change because of your work? Your responses may include both data-driven and narrative components. Finally, I want to highlight a new question in our application that asks, are there others carrying out the same or similar organizational work? How can or do you work together to prevent duplication of services and amplify your impact? Examples of responses to this question might include mentioning how you meet with other service providers in your sector to identify gaps in service and provide those services to, say, your geographic area if the need is unmet, and how you implement a referral system between agencies for respective geographic areas or populations. Perhaps your organization regularly collaborates with another organization to put on a workshop series each year because you each bring different skill sets or have different relationships with the community that can be brought to the table to increase the impact of your workshop series. Or maybe you share lessons learned and promising practices with outreach strategies with another organization in the same sector. So, key takeaways. Again, this is a lot of information, and given that, we ask applicants to meet with us before applying. The goal of this is to allow time for foundation staff to weigh in on whether the project you have in mind might be a good fit for the grant you have in mind, so that you can make an informed decision before spending valuable resources on your application. We are so grateful for your time spent participating in this information session today, and we strongly encourage you to take a look at our grant guidelines, tutorial on how to use our online grant management system, and the philanthropy mass budget, and overall information on our website too, so that when we do meet, we can really zone in to the meat of assisting you rather than answering questions like when the grant deadline is and things like that. This way, we'll have as much time as possible to support you. So thank you so much. My contact information is on this slide and it's being sent in the chat, or it will be, and is also written in our grant guidelines. And if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to email me. If you would like to set up a meeting, the quickest way to do that would be to go to our Calendly links and select, or my Calendly link really, which is on this screen, and select the time that works best for you to meet. And this will automatically set up a meeting between you and I via Zoom or over the phone. So we're really grateful overall for your time participating in this session today. And we're going to use the rest of the time together to answer any questions you might have. And so we'll stop the recording now. And Helene is going to, I think, look through some of these